I have survived multiple rounds of layoffs in multiple different companies. Your number is up at a certain point. When was the last time we saw anything groundbreaking from Apple? That was in the 90s. I've seen in industry a trend towards hiring people that don't have the chops to do the actual research. Just do it before. Just do it so you're not wasting billions of dollars. When you do a lot of generative research and then you launch a product without doing tactical research, the product doesn't perform. I don't particularly think that AI is where people thought it was. Actually, I know it's not. When you see big tech moving into a space that they don't understand, they mostly just get annoyed that the FDA is like blocking them from moving fast and great either. Lipstrap just got a letter from the FDA telling them they had to remove or validate this segment. It's really expensive to get it to market, but the person that's going to come up with how to create the AI space and to take it to the next level is probably someone we haven't even seen yet, who's like living at their parents' house in their basement and happens to be 15 years old. You're not paying me for my hours, you're paying me for my efficiency. You're paying me for the fact that I can do half the work and half the time because I have the experience to do it appropriately. If you come to a consulting firm and you're that far along, your product is probably not going to make it to market with a study.
She survived multiple layoffs at Meta, built a consulting firm from scratch, and now helps medtech companies navigate the FDA's toughest regulations. This is the Inevitable Cast, sponsored by Inevitable Flow, and today's guest is Staci Miller, founder of Genux Consulting. From fashion designer to human factors expert, she's sharing the brutal truth about innovation, the yes men problem plaguing big tech, and why your product probably won't make it to market.
Welcome to the Inevitable Cast. This podcast is sponsored by Inevitable Flow, a consulting firm specializing in helping architecture, engineering, and construction companies achieve a predictable flow of qualified leads and scale their operations with intelligent process automation. Through AI-driven solutions, Inevitable Flow combines strategic prospecting with automation so that companies can increase revenue without relying solely on uncertain referrals or the need to hire large teams. To learn more and schedule a free consultation, just click the episode description. Our guest today is Staci Miller, founder and director at Genux Consulting, a woman-owned firm at the intersection of research, design, and compliance, with a background spanning Meta, Medtronic, and Abbott. Staci has helped launch cutting-edge technologies and drive billions in ROI for clients. At Genux, she now partners with medtech and big tech companies to blend human factors research, design, and strategy into seamless product launches. Beyond her consulting work, she also hosts a podcast bringing thoughtful conversations on innovation and user experiences to a wider audience. Staci, it's a pleasure to have you here today. And in researching a little bit about you, I could see that you wear multiple hats as a founder, as a design leader, and a podcast host. And my question to you to open this podcast is, what motivated you to start Genux Consulting after your corporate career?
That's a great question, and it's pretty simple. First, I didn't think I was ever going to start another business because previously in another life, I was a fashion designer. And in my early 20s, I started a clothing company that was taken out in the 2008 recession. And I went back to school and I got a master's degree in human factors and ergonomics. And I was like, I'm never doing that again. It was so stressful. It was like the worst failure I'd ever experienced. But, I figured something else out. It took a minute for me to figure out what I was going to do. But there was a lot that I learned and a lot of stress that came along with a business failing that you just didn't know was going to fail. And there was many businesses that failed in 2008. I'm not special in any way, but it was very personal to me. So I had survived multiple rounds of layoffs in multiple different companies. And when you work for the corporations like you said that I've worked for, your number is up at a certain point. You just have to be very aware of the fact that there's going to be a day where you're probably going to get involved in one of the layoffs. And Meta started to lay off employees when I was working with them. So their first layoff was in November. And then they said they weren't going to do anymore because they cut 13% of the staff. And then they changed their minds. And they started to cut a lot of staff in a lot of different groups. It really wasn't specific to any group. Lawyers were cut, recruiters were cut, research designers were cut, engineers were cut. So I really started to, ask myself these questions I asked myself at the end of the year, which is, what do I get excited about? What takes my energy away? Where do I see myself in 3 to 5 years? And there's a couple of other questions that I kind of resurface every year just to check in, right? And the things that I was trying to achieve in corporate, I really wasn't getting there. So I was still interviewing because again, post-traumatic stress from the company before, but I'd already started to look for clients. And one after another, they just kind of came in. So I decided, officially to just launch Genux, but not as an independent consultant, as a firm. So I was originally just going to be an IC, an individual contributor, and work for multiple companies with different kinds of contracts, but I didn't really have the vision for that. And what I noticed when I worked at Facebook and Meta, sorry, those are the same companies, but when I worked for Meta and I worked for Medtronic and I worked for Abbott, I also worked at Samsung. When I worked at those companies, what I noticed was when design and research worked really closely together, the products and the concepts that they came up with were fantastic. And they were some of the best products I would ever launch with those businesses. So I really feel like there's a missing intersection in a lot of big tech and med tech companies where you don't necessarily have design and research working as closely together. And I think that they're two sides of a coin. So because I saw that block in the market, that's what we've been developing here at Genux. And that's why, a long story short, established Genux. And we're 3 years in now, and we have quite a few clients.
Beyond the insight of design working closely with research lead to better products to the market, what other lessons you carried into building your consultancy?
Oh, that's a good question. So I have worked in consulting firms before, and I'm not going to say that they do anything better or worse than what I do. But what I will say is for most businesses, there's only a handful of documents for medtech that actually need to make it to market. And I find that in other consulting firms, they kind of want to do all this other stuff that's unnecessary. I think it's more necessary in big tech to do the things that people want to do in med tech. Med tech is very expensive. It's very hard to bring a product to market. You have to be concise and you have to focus on 4 documents: the use specification, a URRA or a UFMEA, which is a risk document, the validation protocol for the summative study, and the human factors engineering file, which is the results of everything that you've done throughout the building cycle of the product. So those are the 4 things that I focus on in my business. Other businesses focus on a lot more than that. But to get you to market, that's pretty much what I focus on. The second thing I focus on is not necessarily generative research, which is very difficult to do. I think people think it's really easy, but in my experiences, generative research usually leads to a stakeholder focusing on the person who said this one thing that really resonated with him or her, instead of focusing on the bell curve of what everybody said. So when you focus on the bell curve of what everybody said, the design is very different, or the product comes out very different. And another thing I've noticed within all of the companies I've worked in is that there's this, people really like generative stuff as opposed to tactical. When you're going to launch a product, you have to make sure that the product that you've designed is going to launch and behave the way that it's supposed to in the marketplace. And I see a lot of companies who they shy away from that part of it. So once you have a soft launch and you do regression testing, that's where you can kind of see failures. Where I'm of the mindset, just do it before. Just do it so you're not wasting billions of dollars. And a lot of times when you do a lot of generative research and then you launch a product without doing tactical research, the product doesn't perform. So we focus a lot on tactical research. We're very good at all of the research, but we focus on tactical because by the time someone's coming to us, they're not necessarily in a place where they're still doing generative research. They're usually like, oh, I need to do this thing and get this product to market. How do I do that as quickly as possible? And I'm like, well, there's a couple of pathways. Mostly, we need to see if your product even would do the things that you think it's going to do. So we start there. Usually, I will say this, and it's very unfortunate, but if you come to a consulting firm and you're that far along, your product is probably not going to make it to market with a study.
Wow, there is a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I'm not even going to attempt to repeat the name of the 4 documents you said you use, but in terms of them and plus the technical research, how does Gen UX would differentiate itself from other design and research consultancies?
So there's not any design and research consultancies. There's design for industrial design or mechanical engineering, and then they bring on a human factors team, and then they might bring on an industrial design team, and then so there's nothing that's just like we focus really in the digital space and research and the combination of both. So there's not anybody else that I know that's doing that right now. There's a lot of focus in other consulting firms to be a one-stop shop. And I never want to be the one-stop shop, which I know sounds crazy. People really like the one-stop shop, but I'm going to be really focused on what we do, and we're going to be very good at what we do. There's nothing wrong with being the best that you can be in the space that you're in, rather than stretching yourself too thin and expanding in places where you can be okay or good,
Right.
but I would rather be great. So these are the things that I know how to be great at. So we focused on those. And those are very me-centric. And, in 5 years, maybe that changes, but I don't think so.
Right. I can only imagine the level of scrutiny that such documents go through with all the regulatory bodies looking at it. And like how many times do you need to write something like to make it compliant with what regulators want to see?
So that's a really good question, but I would say that it has more to do with your team reviewing it more so than the FDA or international bodies reviewing a document. So the documents don't really go under a lot of scrutiny unless they're particularly bad. I don't know how else to explain that, but the standards that you are compliant to when you're doing something in a regulated space are very prescribed, with the exception of human factors. So all the other standards, they basically say, this is how you do this thing, do this thing. But when it comes to human factors and ergonomics for medical device, there's a guidance. A guide is not the same thing as a prescribed instruction. So there's like leeway in how you write certain things. Therefore, depending on the regulatory body that you're submitting to in the FDA, because there's a couple of different divisions, which is confusing, but there's like two different divisions. There's the CEDAR group, and then there's what I call the regular group. And the CEDAR group deals with like combination drugs and device. And then the regular group that I'm calling it is like one product, one thing. It does the thing that it's supposed to do. And depending on who you get to review your documents, they're usually going to be more concerned about how you're doing your summative study, the verification and validation segments of the research to get to market. And that's where most people get a lot of feedback. They will ask about sample sizes, different user groups, different things that they might think that you need or suggest. And the FDA doesn't suggest. They tell you. So you have to do the thing that they tell you to do because they write meeting notes. So those are the things that are heavily scrutinized. It's not necessarily the documents in general.
Understood. And I would assume you're mostly talking in terms of like med tech now, or maybe this applies in like across the board between med tech and startups that you work with.
Med tech mostly, because tech's products don't necessarily need to go through the same amount of scrutiny as a regulated body. However, whenever tech tries to go into the medical space, which you've seen quite a few big companies try, like Fitbit was one of them, and they talked to the FDA and they worked some things out. But Fitbit is not a medically approved device. It's not going to be either. Bootstrap just got a letter from the FDA telling them they had to, and it was all over LinkedIn, but telling them they had to remove or validate this segment of what the product offered their clients. And they didn't do that, but the FDA said you have to do this due diligence to make these claims and to sell this part of the product online. So I don't really know what Bootstrap did. I'm assuming that they probably like took that part of the product offline because it's really expensive to get it to market. But that's the big difference between big tech and med tech, is that big tech moves fast and breaks things, like Meta says all the time. And it's a good thing to do. I mean, it creates innovation. However, in the medical space, you can harm human beings. Whereas like if you're selling an ad to an advertiser, you're not really harming them physically. But if you're giving a user misinformation or you're causing them duress, that falls under a totally different category of something that the FDA does regulate. So when you see big tech moving into a space that they don't understand, they mostly just get annoyed that the FDA is like blocking them from moving fast and breaking things, but they're there for a reason.
Very much so, and well said, well answered this question. I think I resonate with the way you run your business a lot with my own business. You don't want to have like all the clients you can get. You want the best clients. You want the best experience for your team. You want to surround yourself with people that are better than you in certain ways. You know, they're smarter, they're wise. You know, you can learn from them. I like to find myself sitting on the table that like I think I am the least smart person in the room, you know,
Yeah.
because I just see that as an opportunity to enrich myself and learn more and, you know, deliver good work and inspire myself. So that's even like one of the reasons why I started this podcast, is like to talk with entrepreneurs that are doing amazing work and, you know, get inspired by just listening through their journey. But shifting, Staci, a little bit the conversation now to like industry trends and, you know, how you see the industry moving forward. I wanted to get your thoughts on like what are the most exciting shifts that you're seeing in UX and human factors research today?
That's a great question. So I don't know if I'm seeing it as innovative as I think that it should be. And I know that that's not the positive spin that I could put on it, but I've seen in industry a trend towards hiring people that don't have the chops to do the actual research. And what that's created when you work in these really big bureaucracies is what I call yes men, people who say yes to management and like try to regurgitate the things that management is saying through data. And I think that's terrible. And here's why I think it's terrible. And of course, like this isn't me just saying that as an entrepreneur. This is me saying that as an employee who would get to trouble for being this person. I don't think it's wise to regurgitate what people want you to say. I think it's wise to give them the information that they asked for, which may not be the same. If they asked for you to do research on X and your results do not line up with their narrative, too bad, so sad. There's a reason for that. And I think that what's going to happen, or what has been happening, is I haven't seen a lot of innovation coming out of a lot of American companies. I'm not going to lie, I don't see it. I think the language models like ChatGPT and AI that everybody's talking about, those are really interesting, but I think they could be a lot better. And I think they're going to get a lot better when different research is done in different ways. And I think that the things that are coming out on market aren't anything new and they're kind of boring. So I do think the pendulum is going to swing. And I think that we're going to start to see a generation of leaders who come into these really big corporations like Amazon and Meta and specifically Apple. I'd love to see Apple bring something new to the market. Like, when was the last time we saw anything groundbreaking from Apple? That was in the 90s. And then,
Right.
well, I mean, there's a couple of other things like the iWatch was really cool, but it wasn't a new idea. Samsung was already doing a watch. It's just that Samsung, for whatever reason, doesn't have the type of market share that Apple does. For whatever reason, I'm not really sure. I worked at Samsung and couldn't really figure it out. The products are really good. It's just that there's something sexy about Apple. So I would like to see this new generation of leaders, which I believe is going to happen because people are kind of bored of the technologies that we are using. And I do think that there's going to be this new push and this new concepting that comes out, maybe through AI, maybe through the concept of AI. And because there's so many people trying to purchase that brain power of the people who are behind these language models, right? And these engineers that have created something interesting like this, and where that goes, where it can go versus where it is right now. Because I don't particularly think that AI is where people thought it was. Actually, I know it's not, but that's neither here nor there because I've worked on those teams who help develop machine learning, which is the same thing as AI. Except I think people focus on AI being language models or in design spaces. We use AI all the time to make our jobs more efficient, but what we've noticed, and we're going to talk about this on one of our coming webinars, is that it fails to be consistent. It fails to be really good. So I still think there's a future where AI does get really good. And then how that computing power ends up like in a robot or how that happens, we're going to see that in the next 5 years. And how that
Right.
happens is with people like me saying things like, I did not get that narrative. This is what I got instead. And here's where what you're expecting versus reality are very different. And I think we're going to see a trend towards that, even though I've seen a trend away from that. But the pendulum always swings. That's what I'll say. And to get really innovative products, sometimes you have to push on leadership in ways that make them uncomfortable. And that's okay. That's how change is brought about. That's how innovation is created. Like people who changed the world and people like Benjamin Franklin, let's just talk about him. Like he figured out electricity. Sure, he shocked himself like a handful of times before he figured it out. Like it's not like I'm sure that didn't feel very good, but like people who are innovative, they push themselves to do things. Or Einstein. I mean, this guy was a really intelligent human being, but he would sit there and do mathematical problems and defecate in his pants. Like there's stories about that. Now, I don't know if it's true. I didn't know the guy, but these have been stories that have been told. I mean, so these people who can push these things forward kind of like abuse themselves a little bit. They're like kind of abusive and they do weird stuff, but it comes. And I still think like the person that's going to come up with how to create the AI space and to take it to the next level is probably someone we haven't even seen yet who's like living at their parents' house in their basement and happens to be 15 years old. Like, I think that's where this is going to happen because innovation does happen with a lot of young people because they're not afraid to try something. They're not afraid to electrocute themselves, is what I'm saying. Like, they'll do that thing and be like, oh, that hurt. That didn't really work out. So I'll do something else. But it always comes through the one avenue you're not expecting, right? So that's where I think things are going. So trends within my industry, specifically on the FDA side, I feel really bad for the FDA right now. They've had a lot of years where they've been super short-staffed, not recently. They've been short-staffed since I've worked with the FDA, so like at least 10 plus years. And what we're seeing a lot more of is the people that are rising to the top at the FDA, and those reviewers are super taxed and they're not getting enough support from younger engineers who are now, part of the FDA doing review cycles. And they don't have a lot of human factors engineers because we all go private. Most of us go private because we just do. So there's a lot of requirements and I want to say knowledge transfer or tribal knowledge that kind of just gets learned through the years of doing the kind of work that I do when it comes to regulated bodies, specifically the FDA. And that's a trend in and of itself. It's not necessarily written in the guidance what they end up asking for. So like URRAs, which is a document that documents risk. There's been ways that we've done it in the past, and that document evolves all the time because the FDA gives a lot of feedback to other clients. And you're hearing all this feedback, and it kind of morphs these documents into something completely different than what you had, I want to say 3 to 5 years ago. But the guidance hasn't changed. It's all tribal knowledge. So that's a huge trend that I would tell anybody in my industry on that side with regulation happens all the time.
Big techs. And all of this that you do is really impressive, I gotta say. And it also sounds like a lot of work, like research and development and client expectations. And you really need to detach yourself from the end result because you don't really have much control other than doing the best job you can to really, draw up the facts and put it in a report and a document that would lead to decision makers making the right kind of decision. But I would imagine you don't have such a big team, right?
Yeah.
How do you balance like amount of workload with the demand? Because I would think that for each client it takes a lot of hours for you to fulfill on a work, and then if you have many clients, like how do you manage this? How do you balance the capacity and demand?
Those are great questions. So first, we would never take on more than we could accommodate. That's number one, because we don't overpromise and underdeliver at Genux. We deliver what we say we're going to deliver. That's number one. Number two, we don't have anybody on staff that's unfortunately like young in their career. I only hire senior and above because for research specifically. Design, you can get a mixture of people who have tons of different levels of experience and they feed off of each other, and that's really awesome. But when it comes to being a researcher and understanding how to do the work that we're required to do to help products to market, you do really need a strong background in research. And that comes from experience and a degree in research and a master's level or higher. So no one on our staff is, I think I'm the least educated person on the staff, to be honest, in the research team. And that's okay. That's okay. I've been doing this long enough, so I know how to do my job efficiently, which brings me to my next point. Because I've been doing this as long as I've been doing it, it doesn't make me the best. It makes me efficient. And that's what people pay for. And I don't know if people really understand, like, you're not paying me for my hours, you're paying me for my efficiency. You're paying me for the fact that I can do half the work in half the time because I have the experience to do it appropriately. And because I've been doing it for so long, I essentially, not just me, but my team and I know, okay, well, this is how you write a protocol. This is how you write a moderator's guide. This is the data we're taking. So some of the stuff when it comes to validation and verification are pretty much prescribed. Whether it's big tech or med tech, you're looking for verifying that your system does the thing it's supposed to do. So you set your alpha in the same way. Like you're proving your hypothesis in the same way. Like, here's my hypothesis. The system is going to be able to do the thing that it's built to do. And then you're just taking data to support that statement. So we do that pretty consistently. And then when it comes to qualitative or quantitative research that's iterative or open-ended, we know what we're looking for. We're not looking for, well, you have a hypothesis there too. And you do the open data and you do the open conversations. And what we're looking for isn't the N of one. We're not looking for the one person that said the thing that was really interesting, like, wow, that was cool. Why would you say that? Like, because that's a one-off. That's not what the average person needs. The average person needs what everybody is saying over and over again. So if you interview a group of 10 people and the consensus is they like red more than blue, well, for whatever reason, that's what that product needs. So it's not necessarily like there's not anything behind it, but so like we're efficient. We know how to template all these things. We know how to write the protocols. We know how to collect the data. We know essentially in parallel, as we're writing the protocol, we're also drafting the results minus the actual results. So like there's just efficiencies that you can create in time. We also know how long something is going to take our team to do. So when we quote something, we're quoting it based on the amount of time that each researcher would take to do the job, because we know how long that's going to be. And then we also efficiently check that also. So every year I look back on the projects that we've quoted and I look back on the timeline that it took, and then I adjust our estimates based on that. So we're efficient.
And my question to you on this topic is, I would imagine that, these compliance heavy industries, and often they have a long sales cycle, right?
Yeah.
And how do you navigate that challenge of presenting a proposal and navigating the decision making that it takes for these companies to get forward with you on a proposal?
That's great. That's a great question for my VP of sales, Christina. But at a high level, you're right. The sales cycle is much longer. So from contact to sign on the dotted line, you're looking at 3 to 6 months. It's not short. And what happens so it depends on the product and it depends on the company. Our target audiences are not necessarily the big whales. Like we don't go after Google. We don't go after Metas. Like those would be great to have. Don't get me wrong, they'd be wonderful corporations to work with.
I would imagine they would be even longer sales cycles for those ones.
Sometimes, yeah, because you have a master service agreement with those corporations and there's contracts and then there's insurance that you have to carry. So it takes a long time to like onboard. Even once a contract is agreed to, it could take anywhere from 6 months to a year to get one of these guys. So not that I don't want them, it's just we're not there. We don't have the kind of capacity to handle like the burn and turn that some of those companies would need. We know that. So again, I don't go after things that I can't accommodate. But we also really like living in the startup / mid-size space. Those companies pivot really quickly. There's not as much bureaucracy. They can make the changes. They can do the things. So those companies, depending on the size and the funding, when it's a startup, or if it's a mid-sized company, again, everybody's dealing with funding and like how funding gets delineated to each group. Anywhere from like 1 to 3 months is pretty average. There's been one that's taken like 6 to 8 months to land, but that's pretty abnormal. And part of the reason that this happens, and I'll say this because it's true, I'm the new kid on the block, right? Like some companies are like, you're not going to be here in a year. And then when you are, they take notice. And then 2 years in, they're like, well, she's not going anywhere. And then you hit year 3. And that's when things get a lot easier because you've made a bit of a name for yourself. I'm not saying that I'm the best or anything in my industry. That's not true. But I have grit and I'm consistent and I show up and I do a good job. Actually, I do a pretty good job. My whole team does. So when you do all that and you're consistent and you show up and you do what you say you're going to do, that takes a lot of, character, and people respond well to that. And I would even say, like, people who I've known in industry, they're even waiting to see what happens. Like, they don't know that they're waiting to see what happens, but it takes some time. They're like, well, we could hire her as an IC, but she's a consulting agent. She's a consulting firm, so that's way more expensive. So is it worth it? Like, so there's this like constant back and forth, right? And because we're fractionalized, and I want to go back into that statement, we want to be a fractionalized business. We want to show up when you need us, not when you don't. So depending on the need of the business, especially larger businesses, they tend to need like a core team member or a team member who's more of an individual contributor who takes up more time with that business unit. Whereas what we try to do is just come in when we're needed, do the thing that you need us to do, get you to market, and then again, come back when your 2.0 version of that thing is. So we're intentionally not trying to be your staff. So
Right.
large corporations need that, which is why their sales time is longer, and you have to have a dedicated staff to that. Whereas smaller corporations, the sales cycle is shorter, but it's all fractionalized intentionally. So you just have to
I,
keep that road going, so like a path in front of you for
Great.
more sales to come in for the pipeline.
Amazing. Great insight, Staci. As we transition towards the end of the episode here, I wanted to ask about, exciting future plans that you have in mind. And I want to ask you two questions. First one being, if we were to have this conversation again in a year from now, what would you hope to be celebrating for GenUX and for yourself?
So I would like to have an office by then in the state that I think I'm going to be living in, which is California, and be doing 3 times the amount of business that I'm doing right now with a staff the size of about 10 people. Because right now I have like 4, 5 people that work with me, 3 full-time, 2 part-time, and then me. Like I'm included in that number. So I would like to have 10 and do 3 times the business, which I could if that was the case, and more full-time employees, right? Paying them what I want to pay them, creating this awesome space with those people, and having a really good work environment where people enjoy coming to work. And we talk about a lot of things at GenUX, and this is kind of a strange thing, but what I do like about my team is that we're not just like a startup. We talk about planning every 6 months. So we have these live conversations where the staff who is not normally involved in planning or coming up with concepts for the future of a business comes and brings ideas of like, here's where we should go, here's what we should do, here's some concepts, let's try this, let's try this. And I love that. I want to continue to do that and foster those relationships and build more based on like feedback that I get from everybody around me, which is why I want to stay small in general. I want people to tell me when they think something sucks. I want that. I don't want them to be like, yeah, that's a great idea. Like, really? Really? You think this is great?
Yeah.
Would you do it? No. Well, then let's not do it, right? So that's where I would like to be this time next year, which I think is actually a reality. So
Very honorable and amazing goal for next year. I mean, if I had the capabilities, I would even like sign up for a job opportunity with you. But unfortunately, I'm very far away from research. And my last question is related to this first one, related to your answer. Is if you had a magic wand to wave and remove an obstacle that is holding you back right now to achieve this in the next year, like what would it be?
I think it would be more sales, like with the capacity of being able to handle those sales and that timeline. We're doing great. I'm really happy with the progress we've made this year. Really, really happy, very grateful for everything that we have and that's being brought into our environment. But I know that my VP of sales will need a junior sales associate sooner than later, right? And that would be one of the roadblocks in the way. And then cash flow. Cash flow is always a thing for businesses. It just is. I would like more consistent cash flow. And I believe that we're going to have that when you have more sales and more staff. So as long as I have those 2 things, those are the biggest, I think, roadblocks. But I think those are the biggest roadblocks in every business. I think it's what every founder thinks about. It's like, can I pay my employees? Is there enough cash flow? Are these people going to pay me? And as of right now, that hasn't been a problem. And I'm super lucky.
Amazing. Well, if you're paying attention to these variables, you're definitely on the right track to get GenUX there. Staci, thank you so much for your time here. It has been a great conversation. I feel like we could do a second episode and still have a lot to talk about.
Thanks, G. Anytime. Anytime you want to, Guy, I will be here and talk to you and do all the things. So I would love to, if you want me to come back, I will come back. And yeah, this was a really cool conversation. Thank you so much for having me on the Inevitable podcast.
Amazing. That's it for today's episode of the Inevitable Cast. This podcast is sponsored by Inevitable Flow, a consulting firm that helps architecture, engineering, and construction companies generate a steady stream of qualified leads and scale their operations with AI and intelligent process automation. If you'd like to explore how these strategies can work for your business, click the link in the description to book a free consultation. See you next time.